Hello, everyone. My name is Erica Chavez, and today I want to present my favorite auteur of dark fantasy and in general, who's Guillermo del Toro. So, my main source is coming from Deborah Shaw, who wrote The Three Amigos. I'm also taking this class called Three Amigos, who is also being taught by Stephanie Becker. So that will be my main source, as he is someone we are covering in great detail. And she says and calls him an alchemist of filmmaking. I argue that in his intertextual approach, Guillermo del Toro demonstrates that he is an alchemical filmmaker from a range of transnational, transhistorical, and transgeneric sources. He creates something that he makes his own. A Del Toro film is curiously postmodern mix of multiple cultural borrowings and authorial appropriation. His hybridization of multiple genres within his work while using traditionally American and European themes as vehicles for this throughout his filmography we will mainly see a crossbreed between horror and dark fantasy. Del Toro often grounds his tales in historical context, either to creatively examine society's past mistakes or to note how little our mistakes have changed over the decades. In his film, we can always count on fantastical world building that is still shaped by the real world surrounding our characters. Now, that is what drives most of his themes and motifs. In every Del Toro film, we can be sure to see themes of human imperfection and disobedience. Only when we embrace the monstrosities within us can we reach true freedom, is what he wants to get across the most. And more times than not, though there is a creature or monster present, the real monster is often human, based off of those imperfections. The use of creatures is the best way that Del Toro depicts this flaw. The monsters are often flawed outsiders that may look different but aren't necessarily evil. The true darkness lies within characters that appear flawless. How different doesn't mean evil. Composure doesn't equate to virtue. These human monsters reveal themselves as the real monsters of Guillermo's world by forcing their views with violence, and the neglected outsiders destroy their facade and unveil their true nature. Not only that, but we encounter a social and political statement and parallels within his stories. In his directorial debut from 1992, we see Kronos, which is supposed to be a allegorical reading of the vampiric relationship between Mexico and the U.S. This was his one of the most expensive Mexican films ever, with a budget of 2 million. This might just be at the time, but we see the Kronos device, which is 400-year-old scarab that grants its user eternal life by turning humans into vampires. So the real monster in this film is the grandfather Jesus, who is obsessed with eternal youth, and the temptation of it. And it's a testament to timelessness and immortality, centering on its obsession with youth. By chasing the past, we forget about the future. Eternal youth is given up, and Jesus accepts his mortality. Another thing we will see largely within Guillermo del Toro's work is death is what makes life valuable, though it is our greatest human imperfection. And like most of his other films, it is emphasized that the beauty of life is through its transience. And here are some film stills from from the film. The makeup in the second photo, the more blue hueish one, is not that great, but $2 million can only get you so far. But it's a beautiful story between two different generations, a grandfather and a granddaughter. The granddaughter just takes care of her grandfather, even though now he's a blood sucking vampire. She doesn't care. That's still her grandpa. And he's still obsessed with youth, but even more obsessed with youth is the person trying to get the Chronos device back. And though he is tempted with even drinking his granddaughter's blood, he doesn't, which is also a testament to um, having a rich relationship through generations. Even though they're coming from two different places, two different mindsets, like Aurora is eventually going to grow up and become her own person, but just because he may not understand something that she's going through in her new generation doesn't mean that they can't have a rich relationship. And I think that's what he's also trying to say through the vampire lens. But also, I just wanted to call attention to the disassembled photo of the Chronos device, which I think is just beautiful. And I don't know exactly what the engraving says, but the attention to detail, and whoever commissioned this, they're so talented. So, moving on to Pan's Labyrinth, which is Del Toro's most iconic film, was released in 2006. We see his greatest endeavor in making the disobedient fairy tale. Disobedience becomes a major theme in this film, whereas in many fairy tales, disobedience is what sets the story in motion. Disobedience is a vital and important quality, even though it can be a human imperfection. It is shown through a group of rebels trying to free Spain of fascism. Our paralleled story of Mercedes, who is basically a housekeeper for the real monster of the film, a fascist leader named Captain Vidal, who is our main character, Ophelia's stepfather. And Ophelia and Mercedes, the rebels, they are all the doctor, they are all disobedient. They are all disobeying either the commander, Ophelia with her mother, Captain Vidal, and even she disobeys the Fawn's orders at the end of the story. She doesn't want to give up her little brother's life. Del Toro's genius in Pan's Labyrinth is to take a formulaic genre like a fairy tale and disobey the audience's expectations and hope for how it will end. Eventually, our protagonist dies. Though Captain Vidal is captured and killed, historically Spain will continue under authoritarian dictatorship for the next 30 years. And it seems like a very bleak ending because though Del Toro has said that the ending is true for Ophelia when she reaches the kingdom, the skepticism in some viewers cannot look past only seeing a girl who lived a sad life, compensating, playing out a comforting fantasy in her head for her very last moments. But I still think it's very beautiful, and the historical political parallels that we see are insane. Like, Captain Vidal is a mirror for the Pale Man in the underground world, in the underground fantasy world, because we see the Pale Man, Captain Vidal, at the head of the table of a beautiful banquet. We see paintings of the Pale Man that are supposed to reflect devouring children or also just raising children in fascist Spain to not come into their own and replacing the fascist leaders at the time. And I think also the grandest political parallel that we see are the pile of shoes that are supposed to reflect the Pale Man devouring all these children, but they seem like photos that we see depicting Auschwitz. The piles of just gray shoes that we see, and it is truly haunting. And so Del Toro weaves these references together with camera work and editing to achieve a narrative momentum that is undeniable with all of his films. And especially in Pan's Labyrinth, I wanted to discuss the importance of the color palette that we see. So even though the Pale Man is terrifying, doesn't seem whimsical or a part of a fantastical world at all, um, this color palette, amongst his beautiful banquet in which Ophelia becomes, um, I guess, what's the word? Tempted by. Sorry. Um, we still see the ending shot where she finally reaches her kingdom and she sees her father and her mother at the top of the throne, the two people that she wants to be with the most. They're still in a light, beautiful color palette that is hopeful and golden and beautiful. We see when Ophelia reaches this state of mind and this kingdom, we see her look down and tap together her red shoes like she's in The Wizard of Oz. Um, and it's hopeful, it's golden, literally. But then we cut back to the real world where the fawn is, or where she's being shot, and it's a glum blue color palette, and it's the real world. But in the bottom shot where we see Ophelia after she's been shot, there's a slight contrast where we see her her blood covered hand, but it's almost hopeful in a way where it's like, this is it, and this is where you get to reach your beautiful ending and no longer have to live in the real world. And I also wanted to show the sketches for Pan's Labyrinth from the Lost Sketchbook of Del Toro. At the top left, we can see the fawn. We can see the parallel to Alice in Wonderland with these two sketches. You can see the literal rabbit hole that Ophelia must go down, the apron and dress that she wears, just like Alice. You can also see the house that Ophelia, her mother Carmen, Captain Vidal, the doctor, Mercedes are all a part of this grand scheme and all on their own mini side quests. And then on the right, we can see the mandrake, the little baby mandrake that Ophelia needs to put in a bowl of milk and give it blood so her mother can be okay. And a lot of people want to say that the things that Ophelia saw were delusions, but Del Toro has completely wiped those away and said, no, this is real. Like, it happened for her. This is not fantasy. This happened for her. And I really love that outlook because it's hopeful. And so, my favorite out of all of the films, I know it should be Pan's Labyrinth, I'm sorry, but I saw The Shape of Water when it came out in theaters with my mom, awkwardly enough. But this is Guillermo del Toro's Oscar winner for Best Picture. And so The Shape of Water takes place in 1962 during the Civil Rights Movement and the Cold War, when fear of the other was especially heightened. Del Toro uses the film's main characters to remark on the experiences of those who have been historically othered. The protagonist, Eliza, is a mute woman, her friend Giles is a gay man, and Zelda is a black woman. Eliza, and they all come together for one moment of solidarity to just help the other. And it's beautiful. Eliza and the creature fall in love by recognition of otherness rather than curiosity. As usual, the real monster of the film is Strickland. And he's the guy who is just dedicated to beating the Soviets, torturing the creature with a cattle prod. And the way that Del Toro describes him is that if you were to watch a movie in 62 and see a man like Strickland looking like James Bond with a clean cut and a suit, he would be the hero. And the monster would be the monster. And so he wanted to put it on a paradigm and just flip it completely on its head to mirror the creature from the Black Lagoon, which he drew most of his inspiration from. He saw this beautiful shot of the woman that the creature from the Black Lagoon was obsessed with swimming at the top of the water and the creature swimming underneath her. And he always envisioned the two of them getting together. And he's like, oh, like they're going to fall in love and be together forever. And that didn't happen. The creature from the Black Lagoon was always villainized, and he didn't like that. And so he was like, I'm going to make my own movie where the creature and the girl get together. And it's beautiful because so the other thing about Strickland being the real monster in the film is that he's a caricature for American exceptionalism with he has the perfect nuclear family, but his character speaks to the notion that nationalism is usually grounded in delusion and misunderstandings. Del Toro wants to stay with Strickland's character that people who pretend that things were great for everyone sweep the ugly parts of history under the rug. A direct quote from Del Toro says, "So The Shape of Water is not a movie about 62. It's a movie that tells you that the racism, classism, and sexual wars, everything that was alive in 62, is alive now." And I think that's awesome. And this is one of the most amazing crossbreeds of, a fairy tale, sci-fi fantasy, love story, a Cold War thriller, and it's in a gorgeous visionary package, as Gail Finney says in her article. And I can't agree more. And here are some beautiful shots that I found from the movie. I I really do love the inspiration from Creature from the Black Lagoon. It's awesome. And also just Sally Hawkins does such a great job at depicting her character as just an other, but also just so independent. Like she lives in routine and she seems content with who she is. She knows who she is. She's not unhappy because she's a mute woman. She's not really unhappy at all, but she finds someone that understands her, that sees her as human. And the creature, he wants someone to see him as himself, and that's exactly what she sees. And they just understand each other, and I think it's beautiful. And so, At Home with Monsters is the name of Del Toro's exhibit that he had. And I just wanted to start to segue this into a direct quote from him that says, "As a kid, I knew that monsters were far more gentle and more desirable than the monster living inside nice people. And I think accepting you are a monster gives you the leeway to not behave like one. It's a very simple paradox that you understand when you think that to allow yourself to stop hating yourself. There are truths about oneself that are really bad and hard to admit, but when you finally have the courage and say them, you liberate yourself, and the monsters are a personification of that." And here are just some beautiful, beautiful artwork and like part of the exhibit from him. There's the fawn, the pale man, and I think I'm not exactly sure who that person on the left is, but this woman who's a seraph who has all of these eyes but is blind. It's just beautiful. And it kind of reminds me of Pinocchio. His Pinocchio movie is great. Some closing statements that I want to make while I also show you these sketchbook concept arts from Del Toro. Apparently he left this sketchbook in the back of a taxi cab, and then someone asked him, "Hey, do you want your sketchbook back?" And he said, "No, I'm good." Could you imagine giving up these? I couldn't. I don't think I could. I would keep this hanging on my wall, keep it forever, pass it down generations to generations. Um, but what I want to say is that, like Del Toro, I feel some people gravitate towards stories about monsters because we identify with their experience. It's not rare for groups or individuals to be judged as monstrous or dehumanized for traits they cannot change. Those that understand the value of acceptance are found above the enforced social norms, liberated from its oppressiveness. In a world where absolute obedience is accepted, it's those considered the orphans of the society who hold the keys to true independence and happiness. And it's no wonder that the ones placed outside the cage are more constrained, slowly rotting and dying, just like Strickland and just like Captain Vidal. And the overall artist statement for At Home with Monsters, his exhibit, is rather than a traditional chronology or filmography, the exhibition is organized thematically, beginning with visions of death and the afterlife, continuing through explorations of magic, occultism, horror, and monsters, and concluding with representations of innocence and redemption. And here is some more artwork. And yeah, I really, really admire Guillermo del Toro, and I cannot wait to see what else he comes out with. He's a very wonderful man. If you guys can watch any interviews with him and just soak up his awesomeness, I would greatly appreciate it and encourage it. And here are my works cited. And thank you so much for listening.